Imagine a night so dark that even the rain seems to cry along. It's there, on an old wooden bridge swaying above the abyss, that Elisa meets Samuel for the first time. He's alone, soaked to the bone, every lost glance pleading for help without uttering a single word. Elisa, used to hiding her pain within her home's walls, feels the weight of that silence and makes an impossible decision. She comes closer and whispers that no one needs to face the worst alone. His fear merges with her wariness. Both hurt and distrustful, neither really knows if they can trust the other. But what pushed Samuel to that edge? And why? Even while running from everything, can't Elisa turn her back on this stranger? On that stormy night, their walls begin to crack, and an unexpected chance at a new beginning appears. Keep watching and see how the courage to truly see another can turn chasms into bridges and change destinies forever. That night, the wind blew so hard it seemed intent on pushing the whole village into the sea. The rain had been falling for hours, thick and icy, refusing to let up. The old stone bridge, streaked with moss, shuddered with every gust, as though bearing the weight of all the stories it had seen. It was the kind of night no one chose to leave home, unless out of pure desperation or the complete absence of hope. Samuel walked quickly, head down, waterlogged shoes splattering mud. Every step sounded different on the bridge, as if the silence itself softened the crash of thunder. His shoulders were hunched, face tight and tired, but his eyes, he didn't seem to see anything. It was as if he were somewhere far away, too distracted by the dark hole growing inside him. He stopped dead center on the bridge, where the river disappears far below, a perfect hiding place for anyone wanting to leave their past behind once and for all. He gripped the freezing rail until his fingers hurt, standing motionless, staring into the void as the rain poured down his collar. He thought of everything he'd lost, everything he'd never be able to explain to another soul. On the other side, a faint light appeared, moving slowly in the downpour. It was a red umbrella, much too small for all that rain. Under it came Elisa. Her gaze was steady and direct, but not the sort that judges. Her eyes were full of past, the look of someone who once wanted to jump too, but stayed. Elisa walked up to him, unhurried, allowing her footsteps to be heard. She didn't shout, didn't ask what he was doing by the edge. She simply stopped nearby, close enough that he couldn't ignore her presence, but not so close as to startle him. For a few seconds, only the sound of water, rain on their shoulders, and their pounding hearts filled the air. The silence between them seemed to scream. Samuel knew she could truly see him, and that hurt more than any storm. Deep inside, he wondered whether it was even possible for someone to understand so much shame and guilt, but Elisa just stayed, present. The way she held the umbrella, neither offering it nor pulling away. Her face partly hidden in shadow, drops of water glinting in the stray locks clinging to her forehead. Suddenly, it was clear she carried a story no one else knew, either. Two strangers, but already something like accomplices. He looked at her, distrustful, angry at himself. Who does this woman think she is? What does she expect me to say? But she expected nothing. Elisa just took a deep breath, exhaled like someone letting go of a heavy burden. When she held out her hand, it wasn't a grand gesture, almost shy. Samuel looked at her hand, slim, cold, a plain ring, maybe an old family piece. Twice he wanted to refuse, to step back into the darkness of the river, but the third time all he could do was close his eyes and accept the silent rescue. Their hands touched, and, for a moment, he felt a strange warmth. Not pity. There was respect there, maybe even admiration, as if she was saying without words, I watched you sinking, and I'm still here. Neither of them smiled. No tears, no dramatic scene. It was all internal. As they walked slowly together across the bridge, sharing the small umbrella that wasn't quite enough, Samuel breathed in the scent of wet earth, heard the river churning below, the sound of their footsteps. Somehow, it muffled the screams inside his chest. Elisa walked at his side, careful not to trip, hand never letting go of his. Her arm trembled a little, but she didn't complain about the wind, the danger, or the fear. She just kept walking. With every step, the bridge seemed less cold. The storm raged on unchanged, but between this edge and the other, something shifted. It wasn't trust, not yet. Too much fear and distance remained, but it was something else. For the first time in months, Samuel didn't want to run anymore. The knot in his throat loosened, little by little, even though not a word was spoken. When they reached the end of the bridge, Elisa simply nodded, as if saying, "Come with me, just until the chill passes." She didn't explain, didn't ask where he'd come from or what had brought him out into the night. Samuel just followed, because he simply couldn't say no. Deep down, he wondered if this broken woman could really understand how close he'd come to the edge. And Elisa felt, with every step, that perhaps protecting a stranger was all she still knew how to do. Along the way, the empty streets swallowed them whole, leaving only the sound of wet gravel and the distant scent of burning logs. Later, this moment would always send a shiver up their spines. Not because of real danger, but because of what almost happened, but didn't. The silence between the two of them was the first bridge ever built in that forgotten village clinging to the bluff above the abyss. There, in the cold and rain, two strangers began to share the weight of the world, without exchanging a single promise. And without realizing it, something, tiny, fragile, yet real, began to grow. The kettle hissed softly on the stove, the sound soothing amidst the hard silence filling every corner of the house. Elisa spoons coffee into a filter and watches the dark stream slide into her old thermos. The scent drifts through the air, seeming to battle the damp smell of Samuel's clothes, piled in a heap by the door. Samuel perches at the edge of the sofa, staring at the foggy window. Beyond the glass, the rain refuses to let up. Fat drops pound the tin roof, racing down the rusted gutters, forming a dull chorus that, oddly, seems to speak to the secrets each of them keeps. She doesn't ask a thing, not his name, not where he's from, not what he was doing there in the night. She just nods toward the hallway, words stuck in her throat, and says, clipped, "There's a room down there. Clean sheets on the shelf. You can sleep there. Tomorrow, decide what you want to do." Samuel doesn't thank her right away. He sits silent for a few seconds, eyes distant. He can feel the weight of what she's done for him. But there's something about her manner that makes gratitude seem almost inappropriate, a plea not to be forgotten. So he just picks up his worn bag and heads down the hall, treading lightly, as if he's stepping into sacred ground. The room is small, old stains of mold, and a wooden window badly shut where the wind whistles sometimes. There's a scent of soap and solitude. Samuel touches the bed, the neatly stacked pillows. He wonders how many silent, empty nights this house has seen, without laughter, without voices, just the memory of what once was. He questions if he belongs here at all, or if he's just taking the place of a ghost. Back in the living room, Elisa fixes two mugs, one for him, one for her. The coffee's heat feels almost excessive in her hands, which tremble slightly. She doesn't offer conversation or hope, just coffee and an unsettling presence. The old dog curls up near the cold fireplace, watching Samuel with the same wary eyes as his owner. The wall clock nears midnight. They sit in silence, each in their own corner, the little table between them. Sometimes their eyes meet, briefly, like they're searching for some answer in each other's stare, but always return to their coffee, the floor, the emptiness. Inside, Samuel repeats that he'll sleep and leave early, that he shouldn't get attached, shouldn't feel anything. But the house, even with all its barriers, shows small signs of life. A patterned towel hung on a chair, books stacked crookedly, an enamel mug overflowing with colored pencils. He thinks that, in another life, he might have ended up here for a different reason. Elisa feels a cold unlike the rains, a cold made of memories. Since everyone left, some by choice, some by fate, she learned to respect that emptiness. She shares neither house nor pain with anyone. But now, there's a stranger inside, a silent shadow trying not to disturb her, and it leaves her feeling exposed in a way she hasn't in years. She notices how Samuel grips his mug, clutching it tight, like he needs to make sure he won't drop it. Notices he hardly breathes, as if he doesn't want to take up space. A big man, broken from the inside out. She holds his gaze for a moment, wanting to ask if it hurts, but looks away, as if adjusting her bangs. The silence between them is almost an agreement. Don't invade, don't judge, don't dig where the other won't allow. The wind rattles the window, making both of them jump. Almost, they smile, but can't. Samuel thinks he can't remember the last time anyone offered him shelter without asking for an explanation. Here, In a room that smells of the past, for the first time in months, he feels something other than fear. Something more like a tiredness, the good kind, that leads to sleep and not despair. Just before heading to the room, Samuel mumbles a dry good night, like he fears breaking some unspoken rule. Elisa simply inclines her head, swallowing her reply, along with the ache she always feels when she notices her own solitude. The weak light from the lamp sets shadows dancing over the walls as they part, each carrying a world of unspoken things. In the hallway, he hesitates at the door, then stops. For an instant, he wants to go back and ask for more coffee, more company, more meaning, but just leans his forehead against the wood, silent, listening to her footsteps retreating to the kitchen. In the kitchen, Elisa dries a cup she doesn't need to dry, staring into space. She wonders how a person's presence can be so loud, even when they don't say a word. Wonders if she's done right, if it's time to let the world in again. But fear is stronger, and guilt, too. The memory of lost voices echoes in the house's silence. Lying in bed, Samuel turns off the light and stares at the ceiling. The sound of the rain seems less threatening inside. He closes his eyes, trying not to remember the bridge, the biting wind, the abyss calling his name, but instead remembers Elisa's firm, frightened gaze. And for the first time in a long while, he feels not quite as alone. The silence between them remains. It isn't welcoming, but it's not a solid wall, either. Questions drift through the air, and maybe, just maybe, there are small promises of relief, of peace, if they find the courage to face what each has always hidden. The storm outside rages on, but inside, time crawls. The world feels far away. The fear is still there, but right alongside it. For just a moment, a seed of hope nestles in, the kind that only grows in the shelter of shared silence. The sky was heavy that morning. You know those days when the fog settles inside you, not just outside? From the kitchen window, Elisa watched Samuel in the garden, fumbling with a hoe that probably hadn't been used in years. His jacket was far too thin for the damp chill, but he didn't complain. He just hunched his shoulders and forced himself to dig in the earth, as if it gave him purpose. Everything smelled of wet sea and grass. Elisa stood there, coffee mug in hand, trying not to be seen. For a second, she almost felt invaded. This was her space, her routine. Now a stranger was stepping between her azaleas. Fussing with the hydrangeas she tended in private. She thought about telling him not to touch a thing, to say she didn't need help out here. But guilt trembled underneath. After all, she'd asked him to stay, even if she had no idea what to do with his presence. The odd thing was, Samuel seemed to sense her watching. He'd stop suddenly and glance over his shoulder, too quickly to really catch her eye. Each step, he seemed to search for the right way to exist here, not making too much noise. Once, he found a small rock, brushed the dirt off with his fingers, stood there debating whether to keep it or leave it in the garden. In the end, he let it drop, as if any decision could be held against him. The morning dragged on. Elisa went to the door, but didn't cross the threshold. She just stood with her hand on the frame, feeling its roughness, listening to the wind battering the other side. The crash of the sea was constant, just like the exhaustion she carried in her chest. She wondered 1,000 things. Who was this man? Why had he stayed? And most of all, how long it would take until he disappeared, just like all the others who tried to get close since her life collapsed. Outside, Samuel did his best to prove useful. He cleared away leaves, righted a crooked pot, pushed the battered boots borrowed from a neighbor's husband deep into the mud. That feeling of not belonging, that was an old companion. And still, he didn't want Elisa to send him away. For the first night in months, he'd slept more than 2 hours in a row, even with the wind rattling the roof tiles like mad. Now and then, Samuel glanced back at the house, looking for a face in the window. All he saw was his own shadow's reflection. In his mind, too many questions reeled. Did Elisa trust him only half out of leftover compassion? Or was it just fear of admitting that everyone here is alone in this forgotten town? He wanted to thank her for not ignoring him on the bridge, but the words crashed into a wall of awkwardness. He was ashamed of what he felt. The kitchen's old white clock made more noise than any words between them. Elisa turned from the window, started rearranging cabinets just to keep her hands busy. Why was it so hard to relax? The silence could be comforting, but with a stranger close by, it weighed like a stone. Tired, Samuel sat on the wooden step near the garden. He brushed dirt from his pants, stared at the horizon, the sky threatening more rain. The cold breeze stung his face, but he didn't move. In that moment, he wanted to make small talk, to share stories of some childhood garden or how the smell of earth always reminded him of home. But Elisa left no room for that. Every time he shifted, you could see her guard go right back up. At some point, she emerged with a small tray. It wasn't an offering of friendship, just tea. "So you won't catch a cold," she said, far too fast, not meeting his eyes. He mumbled thanks in an almost whisper, trying to gauge if her gesture was sympathy, pity, or just manners. They sat there, each on their own side of the step, steaming tea in hand, eyes turned toward opposite edges of the yard. The urge to fill the gap with any words, about the weather, about hydrangeas, was huge. But both seemed afraid to stumble into a harder truth. Elisa wondered if helping him had been a mistake. His presence brought back her oldest fears, the memories of everything she'd lost. Family, friends, the whole past swallowed up. He didn't seem at ease, either. He kept pushing his hair back, as if holding himself in place so he wouldn't bolt. "You don't have to pretend you're comfortable," she said suddenly, before she realized the words were out. He looked at her, a little surprised, his eyes tired. An even thicker silence settled between them. Inside, Samuel wanted to ask why she'd helped him. He wanted to understand why gratitude weighed heavy and, at the same time, why it scared him so much to stay. But he kept quiet, just offered a crooked, sad smile. Time crawled on. The wind blew leaves through the yard. Sometimes, the rattle of a birdcage or a neighbor's dog barking broke the monotony, but always the sea's background roar returned. Even with so many walls, it was clear, something was shifting. It wasn't instant sympathy or forgiveness. Just that flicker, the tiny spark when two strangers start studying one another, however reluctantly. And that spark, small as it was, meant more than either had felt in a long time. By late morning, when Samuel rose to return the cup and said, "Thank you," it wasn't just for the tea. It was for shelter, for the silence he couldn't quite call home yet, and for Elisa's look, still cautious, but a little less cold than before. He stepped inside. She stayed on the steps a moment longer, warming her palms on the teacup. She had no idea what to expect from him or from herself. She only knew that all this wariness, no matter how painful, was the only way to begin again when everything you've had has already been lost once. That night, it was as if the rain wanted to wash the whole village into the sea. The old wooden house creaked with every blast of wind. The lights went out just after dinner, a sharp pop, then only darkness filling everything. Even so, Elisa didn't bother lighting a candle. Darkness always seemed safer to her, less intrusive. She stayed in the living room, wrapped in a worn blanket, listening to the old clock tick in the emptiness. Elsewhere in the house, Samuel tried to sleep on a makeshift bed near the wood stove. Elisa listened to the heavy drops hitting the window panes, mixing with the barely there sound of his breathing. Occasionally, a deeper sigh. The silence wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't quite desperate either. It was simply all that existed for two strangers trying to nest where no one else could see. At 3 a.m, a different sound cut through the hallway. Not an object, nor the rain. Human, a muffled sob, the wrong sound of someone wiping tears into a pillow. Elisa tensed, her body instantly on alert. Her instinct was to shrink back and pretend she hadn't heard. But the more she tried to ignore it, the more that sound pierced the darkness. She didn't know what to do. A heaviness pressed on her chest. In her head, the old voice nudged her. Don't get involved. Don't carry burdens that aren't yours. Only, it had been so long since she'd heard anyone cry nearby. It hurt a little inside. Maybe it was cowardice, maybe compassion, but after long minutes she got up, slowly, without making a sound. Only someone who's already been afraid of being seen understands moving that way in your own house with a stranger. The cold floor beneath her feet, the faded scent of tea on the counter, everything felt magnified. She found Samuel sitting at the kitchen table, facing away, folded in on himself, elbows propped up, eyes lost to the dark window. He didn't turn when she entered, only let out a small sigh, as if apologizing for taking up that space. The street lamp outside was out, so his face showed only in gentle outlines, disheveled hair, slumped shoulders, the shaky hand of someone who's already cried and is trying to hide it. Elisa lifted the kettle. The silence grew heavier still. The familiar sound of water heating was almost a relief, something that reminded her she was still on Earth. She said nothing. She sensed Samuel needed company more than questions. She grabbed 2 mismatched cups, filled them with tea, handed one to him. When Samuel accepted, he didn't say thank you, just flickered a glance her way. She saw it then, red, ashamed eyes. They sat side by side, a single empty chair between them. The storm outside filled the world. And that silence, different than before, not hostile, just loaded with stifled memories. Elisa looked at her own hands, noticed the little scars, paint smudges from the old chalkboard. She wanted to ask Samuel if he needed to talk, but the words caught. It all felt too intimate, too abrupt. So she just let time pass. It was strange, wanting to help and not knowing how. She thought of her past nights, how only silence would soothe her pain. On the other side, Samuel breathed deep, taking tiny sips, locked in his own battle. The scent of mate mixed with the faint aroma of forgotten cake, folding memories of other times in their wake. Suddenly, he murmured something almost inaudible. Sorry. He didn't explain if he meant the tears, or being there, or the past that weighed down the whole kitchen. Elisa just shook her head, as if to say there was nothing to apologize for. She had cried in secret too, had begged forgiveness without words. So they sat, sharing the warm tea, the storm beyond the windows, and the invisible tremors inside. She saw it in Samuel's actions, that tension of someone still running from something. He twirled the cup in his hands, eyes unfocused, every muscle in his face locked between shame and the fear of falling apart. Deep down, Elisa understood. It was the same discomfort she felt when someone tried to invade her silences. They were like 2 castaways on the same island, surviving without asking how they'd ended up there. With every flash of lightning, the sad line of Samuel's eyes showed, his furrowed brow, his bitten lips, busy working over secrets. Elisa wanted to move closer, to tell him she'd seen enough pain not to judge, but she stayed still. Her very presence, wordless, said it all. For an instant, Samuel fixed his eyes on the bottom of the cup, then on Elisa. It was a long gaze, not threatening, a plea for silence, for a ceasefire. She answered wordlessly, holding the gaze, her damp lashes a promise that she would ask nothing. He could stay, even broken as he was. The rain eased, the tick of the clock kept company. When Elisa touched Samuel's cup, just to steady it in case he let it go, a strange shiver went through her, not fear, but recognition. At that instant, it was as if she recognized a twin ache in his soul. They both knew it was too early for trust, too soon to share secrets. But at least, together, they survived that dawn at the edge of the abyss, in a cold kitchen, where silence, for the first time, made sense. Morning light always looked blue and cold here, as if the whole world outside was frozen in time. Elisa sipped her coffee standing, leaning in the kitchen doorway, quiet. It wasn't her way to let anyone this close into her space, but Samuel was already there. He fidgeted with his hands, circling restlessly outside, staring at the old garden fence like it held a riddle he couldn't solve. The wind was up, the sky still threatening after the previous night's storm. Everything was damp, the smell of earth blending with wet wood. Footsteps sounded lightly. Samuel, holding a rusted tool from Elisa's shed, swinging the hammer as if he'd forgotten how to use it. The fence was full of holes, some posts leaning. It didn't look good. He glanced at her, maybe looking for approval, but Elisa merely folded her arms. She could read his thoughts, wanting to help, too ashamed to admit he didn't know where to start. The silence was strange, but it was no longer hostile. It was just raw discomfort. Samuel dropped to his knees, gathering wood scraps, trying to fit one into a post with a pinch of hope. That's when, as always happens, something went wrong. A rusty nail, a cut on his hand. It didn't bleed much, but enough for him to gasp, jump up, and hide his hand behind his back, almost like a child not wanting to show their mother a scrape. Elisa sighed loudly. She didn't even need to speak. By the look on her face, it was clear she was thinking, one more problem. You don't know how to use that, she said, making no effort to hide her impatience. You'll end up sick here. He turned away, pretending not to care about the cut, but his face was pale. Between his fingers, the blood was starting to thicken. She didn't need to take care of anyone. That wasn't her job here. And yet there she was, rummaging through the kitchen drawer for cotton, alcohol, tape. All of it a little old, a little makeshift, but it would do. She carried it over to him with decisive steps, already prepared to scold him. Sit. Show me your hand, come on. Her tone was curt, but her eyes weren't. There was an irritated kind of worry there. Samuel sat on the little garden steps, shoulders slumped. He held out his hand, sheepish, glancing upwards. His eyes were a mix of wounded pride and something like gratitude, but he didn't let it show much. Elisa cleaned the blood slowly. It wasn't just about tending the wound. It was the way she touched his skin, firm, but with a shy sort of gentleness, like someone trying not to feel, but feeling anyway. He noticed her fingers tremble when the alcohol stung. She pretended it was nothing. They both fell silent. Only the sound of breathing, the wind stirring the leaves, and the sparrows bickering on the roof breaking the quiet. For an instant, Samuel wanted to say thank you, but it felt ridiculous to thank someone for a bandage like he was a child. But she seemed to catch on to his discomfort because she said dryly, "Next time, I'll teach you how to use a hammer." He answered on reflex, quickly, "Maybe you could use an assistant. I'm no good with fences, but no one can wash dishes like me." She let out an involuntary laugh, one of those you try to keep in, but it escapes. The sound felt strange. It had been a long time since she'd really laughed, at least in front of someone. It took Samuel by surprise, too. He looked at her face, lingering a few seconds, as if trying to memorize that smile, as if it were something rare. In her eyes was a warmth that didn't match the rest of her stern expression. Something shifted in that minute. An emptiness settled between them, but it wasn't the silence of embarrassment. It was the kind of pause that lets you breathe deeper, where words stop weighing so much, and what you want most is not to ruin it. It wasn't quite happiness, but close, a kind of lightness, as if the pain they both carried was, for a moment, distracted. She finished the bandage, pressing the tape down a little too hard, just to mask the gesture. He pretended it hurt, pulled his hand away, made an exaggerated face of suffering. "Did you like your students? Or did you torture them too?" His tone was teasing, almost an invitation to keep up the game. Elisa laughed again, surprised at herself. "They never broke anything near me. Maybe just their hearts." She went silent quickly after that. The spark faded from her eyes for a second, and they both turned serious again, thinking about everything they couldn't bring themselves to say. Just then, he remembered how it used to be. The hectic life, sharp words, time measured in invoices and contracts. No one had ever looked after him like this before. There, between an injured hand and a lame attempt at a joke, it felt like life was possible again. Elisa caught herself watching his breathing, the way he bit the corner of his mouth, trying not to show his fear of the pain. She realized she'd forgotten her own scars, the days she was angry at the world just for existing. The house seemed less abandoned. The garden, less sad. Even the gnarled plants swayed gently, as if approving the scene. Samuel glanced at her fingers, so different from his, strong, used to struggle. He thought about how rare it was, that touch, how much he'd needed something like it without even knowing. How much he missed having someone care, even when they pretended not to. Deep down, neither wanted to admit it, but there was the first crack in the wall they'd each built inside their chest. Not a romance, yet, but a kind of refuge. And, for that sliver of morning, even surrounded by past and guilt, they forgot everything else. They were just two strangers, laughing at nonsense, sitting on the steps of an ugly house facing the sea. And their laughter became a small memory, the kind that makes life seem bearable. Like suddenly a future might, little by little, find room there. That early morning, the whole world felt made of mist and silence. The fog blanketed the village so thickly you could barely see the backyard wall. Elisa opened the window like she always did, expecting the scent of wet earth, of a day trying to be born even with everything hidden. It was strange, seeing the world suspended like that, colorless and horizonless, just white and gray. She stood a while, doing nothing, listening to the muffled sound of rain trickling down the roof. Samuel appeared quietly, as if he didn't want to break the spell the mist had cast around the house. His hair was a mess, his eyes tired, like someone who still wasn't used to sleeping on a foreign mattress. They were living this delicate routine of almost strangers. Neither knew exactly what to do when they saw the other up so early. Morning came out soft, almost cutting through the fog. Elisa made coffee as usual, steady hands, the enamel cup worn at the edges. She set the steaming pot on the table and pretended she was alone. Samuel drew up a chair. There was no noise of cars, children, or radio. Just that heavy silence, full of some odd kind of expectation, as if everything they weren't saying was floating in the air between one sip and the next. Samuel stirred his coffee with the tip of his spoon, staring into the mug as if he might find answers there. Elisa knew what that silence was, a kind of armor, keeping your mind busy with little tasks so you don't run into your own pain. For a while, they sat quietly. She looked at her cup. He looked at the yard, swallowed up by white. It was Samuel who broke the silence, awkwardly, touching on something Elisa always avoided. "Why do you never leave the village, Elisa?" It was a simple question, but it landed like a thunderclap. Her fingertips froze on the rim of her cup. Elisa felt her face flush. She hadn't expected that, not first thing in the morning. She shrugged, forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and replied on autopilot, a well-rehearsed line. "Oh, everything I need is here. I don't miss anything else." She looked away, pretended to fuss with a cookie jar, as if worried about cooling coffee or crumbs on the table. Inside, that old ache came back, the fear of giving too much away. Samuel caught on. He didn't push. The conversation died there for a few minutes. Only the noises of the old house, the ticking clock, the light rain still falling outside. But the unspoken words lingered, creating a new discomfort, almost a hidden promise. "If you want to talk, I'm here." Later, when the fog was finally starting to fade, Elisa went out to tend the flowers in the little front garden. It was her favorite spot, not just for the color of the azaleas, but for the feeling that, there, everything was in her control. Samuel showed up soon after, asking if he could help. She hesitated, as always, but eventually gave in. She handed him a battered blue watering can. They walked side by side, watering the plants in silence. Sometimes their hands brushed as they worked, but nobody apologized. It was a kind of innocent contact, almost curious. The smell of wet earth was strong. With every corner of the garden they visited, the fog retreated even more into memory. Samuel broke the silence with a quick story, talking about a time when his life was on a different planet. He knelt beside a small daisy and, with a half-shy smile, said, "Back in the city, I used to have a huge coffee maker. Ground the beans fresh every morning, made a big deal out of it. I thought it could fix any bad day. Now, I don't know. I miss that smell, the sound of the machine. I even envied people who were happy with just that, fresh coffee, a window open." Elisa listened quietly. She didn't look directly at him, pretended to examine a blemished leaf, pulled up a weed. But the truth was those words tugged at something sharp in her. She remembered what she'd lost, mornings with loud music and warm bread, before everything became just emptiness. The air turned thick. The silence wasn't empty. It wasn't a lack of subject, but fear of showing too much. And maybe, too, of finding out someone else was feeling almost the same thing on the other side of the gap. When he finished, Elisa was almost surprised to hear her own voice, low and honest. "I miss things too. Little things." She didn't explain. Didn't need to. Their eyes met for a moment, and neither looked away. It was an open look, recognizing longing in the other. Right there, with nothing said, what was left unspoken grew bigger than both of them. He noticed the care in her hands as she held the flowers. She noticed his care setting down the watering can quietly, not to make a sound. A little later, Samuel found a snail hiding under a leaf. He offered it to her like a peace treaty, a silly gesture, but full of care. Elisa held the snail in her palm and smiled in a way he'd never seen before. It wasn't quite happiness. It was the smile you get when it still hurts inside, but you're starting to accept someone else's warmth nearby. Neither of them said another word the rest of the time. They just stayed there, watering flowers, dirt on their hands, their hearts lighter. The distance between them shrank, not because of words, but in the silence, the kind that comes from beginning to trust again, even without any promises. And in that misty morning, what was once an abyss turned into a bridge, even if just for an instant. There's a time of day, late afternoon, when the village fog dissolves slowly. The cliffs take on a coppery tone, the wind blows in from the sea, and for a few minutes, even those in hiding seem to want to be seen. That day, it was Elisa who opened the windows first. I saw, even if she wouldn't admit it, that something different was happening inside her. It was almost a compulsion, the way she straightened books, dusted furniture, stood distracted at the window watching the sky change color. She told herself it was just routine. But you don't tidy up the house like that for a stranger, nor offer tea just to escape your own thoughts. Samuel sat at the kitchen table trying not to intrude, but every movement gave away his nervousness, a different discomfort than when he'd first arrived in the village. He fiddled with his pockets, looked at the window, avoided her eyes. I think Samuel was afraid of pushing too far, taking up too much room. But that awkward silence, which used to be a shield, now felt more like an agreement. I'll stay here. You there. Maybe just for today, we don't have to run. Elisa poured 2 cups, faking a casualness that didn't fool anyone. The tea's scent filled the kitchen, the steam curling between them like a shared secret. She fumbled looking for sugar and sent a pile of papers tumbling to the floor. Among them, a blue box of letters slipped out and skidded to his feet. Seeing her kneel quickly, almost too anxious, betrayed her more than she'd have liked. Samuel didn't touch the box, didn't even really look at it. He just asked quietly, "You still keep letters?" His tone was gentle, hopeful. Elisa hesitated, like a child caught sneaking candy. She tried to joke, "Just old stuff, you know? Nostalgic teacher habit." But her eyes gave away it wasn't quite that. He felt a strange tightness, the hurt of realizing the person in front of you used to be more open, more alive. Elisa ran her fingers slowly over the box's lid. Her hands shook a little, with cold and with memory, weighing whether to share or hold back. Maybe because, deep down, she saw a wound in him too, one rarely shown. But in that moment, they both broke their old pact of silence. Elisa pushed the box gently to the center of the table. "My students wrote me, back before everything changed." She didn't finish. The weight was there in the air. She pulled out a random letter, undoing the envelope's ribbon with a tenderness that was more respect than fragility. Samuel leaned in slightly, focused. He sensed those children's words, written in crooked handwriting, were almost a tangible longing, clinging to her fingers. Elisa didn't cry, nor smile. She just let her eyes wander the thin lines. "I replied to every letter. Sometimes I miss even my own handwriting. I didn't realize I'd kept them all this time." What Samuel didn't say was that it hurt him too. Letters remind you what's lost when life turns into noise and bad headlines. He thought of torn-up documents, cold emails, heartless sentences read in courtrooms. And here, in this small kitchen, he realized he hadn't kept anything for himself. Only memories he wanted to forget, and some things best not even remembered. The storm outside thickened, and the house's walls creaked as if feeling the weight of the conversation. Neither spoke of the secrets still kept, but both heard the silence of kindred souls standing before the same abyss. Samuel thought about telling her everything, about the trial, the news, the shame of being exposed. But the fear of rejection was still stronger. Elisa wanted to say just how the tragedy took away everything she loved, but her voice died before it got to her throat. Between one letter read and another just touched, Samuel finally asked in a near whisper, "Do you miss being who you were?" Elisa didn't look away, and for the first time, she answered without detours, "I don't know who that is anymore. I just miss not being afraid all the time." You could see the honesty in her eyes. That got to Samuel. Up until then, he'd thought being afraid was his own private weakness. But there was Elisa, utterly herself in her ruins, brave enough to admit her pain. Soon after, she closed the box slowly, resting her fingers on the envelopes and staying that way, maybe silently thanking what she once was. Samuel wanted to say something, touch her arm, promise any kind of hope, but he held back. Instead, he sat in silence, matching his breathing to hers, hoping that this exchange would change them both, with no promises needed. In that simple, surprising way, something began to grow between them that neither could name. It wasn't just trust. It was as if, by revealing hidden wounds, one could recognize stories in the other no one else had the patience to hear. The wind settled for a moment. Outside, the sky was already almost night. Samuel reached for the teapot and poured her more tea. His hand brushed lightly against hers. It was only a second, just long enough for Elisa to stop breathing, but not to pull her hand away. A whole world lived in that gesture, in fingertips, the pause in their eyes, the discreet consent of those who want to stay close, but aren't in a rush. At last, without much explanation, Elisa put the box away in the highest cupboard. As if, in showing it to Samuel, she'd also left with him a little of who she had been. No more lies, only a shared secret. And Samuel, for the first time in years, felt that being truly seen, even a little, might not be so bad after all. The storm faded to a distant murmur, and the house's silence was no longer empty. It was full of everything that might still be born between them, even here, on the edge of the cliffs. Sometimes it feels like all you ever do in this village is wait for the rain to stop. But that night was different. Out in the cutting wind, amid all the heavy memories, an invitation was stuck to Elisa's door. One of those simple, almost childlike notes, the blue ink already smeared. Community dinner at Donazizi's house. Everyone welcome, it said, with a little drawing of bread beside the name. Elisa looked at the note as if it were a bill come due. She muttered she'd only go because she didn't want to give the villagers something to talk about. But before leaving, she hesitated again. She glanced at Samuel, sitting in her wicker chair, awkward, listening to that fine rain drawing lines on the window. She almost told him to stay home. But something in her, maybe the long silences they'd shared, wouldn't let her. And so, they went together. Samuel didn't even know where the dinner was, but followed Elisa, feeling the cold seep in under his coat. They walked side by side along the dirt road, their footsteps mingling with the hidden crickets, and the village felt transformed, more alive, with little lights in every window and good smells escaping from every house. Inside Dona Zizi's living room, the chatter paused only for half a second. Samuel noticed it, and so did Elisa. Someone laughed, someone made a comment about the weather, and soon enough, they melted into the group as if they'd always belonged. Samuel felt Elisa's tension. She kept one arm crossed over her stomach, almost protectively. But Dona Zizi, full of energy, wouldn't let anyone stand idle. She handed them 2 bowls, declared, "Nobody goes hungry here," and insisted Elisa take a thick slice of cornbread. The room glowed with the stove's warmth. The smell of soup mingled with wood smoke and a whiff of cinnamon. Neighbors spoke loudly, laughed at jokes Samuel didn't always follow. He stayed quiet, observing, nearly an intruder, but for some reason, he didn't feel bad, just out of place, like shoes that haven't been broken in. Elisa seemed to want to hide in a corner, but couldn't manage it. Someone was always asking about the school, the garden, or bringing up an old book. Samuel watched her in those moments. Sometimes she looked away. Sometimes she met their gaze head-on, with that caution of someone who's never quite trusted other people's motives. The dinner stretched into the night. Someone brought out a guitar. The music was simple, but sweet. The sound of voices, chairs scraping, forks tapping bowls by accident. All of it created a soft shield, as if the cold outside couldn't get in. Samuel had never been one for parties. He thought back to a time when, years ago, his office table was surrounded by rehearsed laughter and empty toasts. This was something real. He lifted a spoonful of soup, surprised at how good it tasted. It was more than just good. It was the taste of wanting to stay a little longer. Elisa caught Samuel's curious look and found herself smiling. First just at the corner of her lips, then for real, laughing at something silly Dona Zizi said. They glanced at each other, a bit shy. In that moment, the rest of the room faded. It wasn't a look of promises or secrets, just 2 people seeing each other in a place that felt, strangely, comfortable. At one point Samuel got caught in a neighbor's story about potato fields. He tried to follow but quickly got lost. It didn't matter. Across the table, across the night, he sensed Elisa watching, and she realized she was noticing more details than she cared to admit. The way he fiddled nervously with his shirt cuff, how his teeth flashed when he laughed anxiously. The music picked up. Someone started a clumsy dance. Suddenly, Zizi pushed Elisa and Samuel together, joking, "Aren't you 2 going to dance?" He hesitated. Elisa blushed, surprised, but for some reason didn't step away. They moved together to the middle of the room, where no one seemed to really look, but everyone noticed. Samuel reached out a hand, tentative. Elisa accepted. His palm was warm, and for a second she almost let go, almost ran, almost gave her usual excuse. But she stayed. They danced. 2 awkward steps forward, one to the side, laughing quietly at each other. The silence between them was something new. not fear or suspicion, but the silence of understanding, the slow discovery that closeness didn't hurt so much after all. After their improvised dance, Samuel went to fetch more tea. When he came back, Elisa sat by the stove, talking to a village child. He came up quietly, just listening. She was patient with the girl, smiling in a way he'd never seen before, tenderness on her face, something between longing and hope. He sat down beside her, not saying a word. Elisa looked at him. Her gaze was long, calm now. He wanted to tell her everything. His fear of being found out, of failing here too, of ruining this. But he stayed quiet. He simply let his shoulder rest against hers for a moment. A small gesture, but for them, enormous. Night had turned to morning. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, reminding them that tomorrow still existed. But inside, time seemed to have stopped, as if just for them to learn how to exist together without the old burdens. On the walk home, they went in silence. But it was no longer a heavy silence. It was the pause of people not ready to tell everything yet, but knowing it's only a matter of time. Elisa reached for his shoulder, almost unconsciously. "It was good, wasn't it?" she whispered, like someone afraid of breaking a spell. Samuel smiled back, honestly, answering with a gesture, taking her hand gently, warming them both against the cliffside cold. The village slept, but they were more awake than ever. The bridge in the mist was fading, but between them, something new was beginning. Less abyss, more meeting in the middle. Mornings in the village had never been the same since Samuel's arrival. The time, always gray and damp, fit the quiet routine and the silence that protected Elisa from the world. But that morning, something was off. You could sense it before you saw a thing. The sharp smell of coffee carried none of the usual comfort. And Samuel was different. He sat at the table, but didn't touch his bread, didn't look at her. He seemed smaller, as if he'd forgotten how to speak. Elisa washed a cup slowly, waiting for him to say anything. But he didn't. His eyes, which usually looked for hers, stared at a torn piece of paper, missing a corner, as if it had passed through a dozen hands. When he finally handed over the letter, Elisa noticed his hand trembling a little. He said it was nothing, just junk mail, but the way he tucked the envelope into his pocket said otherwise. The silence got thick. Even the sound of rain didn't help. Everything stood still. Even the birds fell quiet. She felt that old tightening in her chest, the foolish certainty that something bad was coming. She didn't ask anything else. She didn't want to pry. But she spent the day remembering the way his shoulders tightened, as if he'd just taken an invisible punch. Samuel spent the rest of the morning in the shed, fiddling with old tools just to keep his mind busy. Elisa taught the village children in the porch, pretending to be lighthearted. But every now and then, she glanced down the road, hoping to see him show up, as he did almost every day at snack time. Not today. The children forgot to make trouble, feeling the tension in the air. Even the neighbor's dog barked less. It was the sort of day only the wind spoke, and everything else shrank away. When class ended, Elisa gathered the papers slowly, stowed the pencils one by one, as if inventing reasons to delay going home. But in the end, she went. Pushed the door open with her hip, tripped over Samuel's suitcase tossed in a corner. It had never been there before. She tried to ignore it, but couldn't. She climbed the stairs and saw his door half open. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, hunched over, the paper in his hands. She almost called out, but bit her lip and just watched. His face was different, harder, his dark eyes stuck somewhere in the past. It was like, even beside her, he was far away, in some big city, surrounded by voices and accusations. Suddenly, he noticed her and tried to smile. A crooked smile, more for protection than welcome. He said he needed air, left without shutting the door. The creaking boards echoed for a long while. Downstairs, Elisa lit the fire, trying to warm the room, maybe chase away the mood. Flames flickered in the window, casting shadows on the wall. Smoke. Memories. Everything became a jumble of silence and doubt. Now she knew there was something in Samuel's story that could destroy everything. She thought of the neighbors' glances, of Dona Norma's curious ways, always wanting to know it all. She imagined the whole village talking, making up tales about the strange outsider and about her, the woman marked by rumors, the ones no one ever had the nerve to ask for the truth. She felt afraid again. Afraid, just like before, when everyone disappeared and only emptiness was left. fear of trusting and losing, fear of being judged for trying to find happiness again, even with hands still full of scars. Time hadn't passed, and Samuel hadn't come back. When darkness fell, she sat down right where she was, on the living room floor. The wind rattled the door, the firewood crackled. Elisa didn't know whether she felt angry at him for hiding the truth or pity for that man, so solid on the outside, so lost within. A faint hum, the sound of footsteps in the hallway. At last, Samuel appeared, eyes lowered, shoulders hunched. He sat, not too close. Words weren't needed, maybe weren't even possible. Their silence was the kind that hurts. Each stuck in their own thoughts, waiting for the other to make the first move. But no one moved. Elisa wondered if this was how things ended. Not in shouting, but in a cold distance. She wanted to ask what was happening, wanted to say she was scared, but her mouth wouldn't work. All the while, her heart drummed desperately, as if any moment now someone would knock at the door, bringing all the truths they'd tried so hard to hide. In this suspended time, every small gesture took on immense meaning. The way Samuel's hand slid through his hair, the tense way he scratched his beard, his eyes darting away from hers. And even without looking, she could feel it. He was fighting. With shame, with a past that wouldn't let him just be Samuel, simple as that. For a few minutes, the fire was all that connected them. Sometimes she wanted to reach out a hand. But when you remember your own disasters, it makes you build walls. He was behind his, and she was behind hers. The sound of rain grew louder. Samuel cleared his throat, shifted in his chair, but didn't go on. It was as if every word they didn't say yelled between them. She wanted him to tell her it was just a scare, that the letter didn't matter. Deep down, she knew that was a lie. What separated them now wasn't just his past or hers. It was the fear that, by opening up, they'd lose the last good thing they'd found after so much pain. And that doubt hung there, hovering between the crackle of the fire and distant thunder. Even the smell of smoke brought memories of other times, things neither wanted to relive. By the end of the night, the village kept on sleeping. Only the two of them, each on their own side, far too awake to dream. That morning, the weight of everything kept between them seemed even heavier. The village was nearly silent, just the wind rattling the window panes and the scent of wet earth after the rain. They'd spent the night awake, each in their own corner, afraid to touch one another, as if a single touch could hasten the end of something. Samuel made coffee before sunrise, just to keep his hands busy, to silence his mind. Elisa heard the clatter of dishes, sat on the edge of the bed for a while, staring at nothing, her chest tight. It felt as if her house's walls had shrunk overnight. The memory of the letter, those cold words, almost a threat, kept circling in her mind. So it was real. Someone wanted to tear Samuel away from here. And what if they tried to do the same to her? She came downstairs slowly, barefoot, trying not to make a sound, but she knew he'd sensed her anyway. The coffee smell was strong, almost sickening to her uneasy stomach. He stood in the kitchen, back bent, as if he'd shrunk. He didn't look at her, just pushed a chair toward her with a gesture. The silence was hard, heavy. It wasn't just the lack of words that hurt, but knowing that fixing what was broken there wouldn't be easy, maybe not even possible. Samuel took a deep breath, clutching the mug with both hands. He didn't want sugar, didn't want anything to soften the bitter taste of fear. Everything inside him screamed to run. He wouldn't say it out loud, but Elisa knew. She felt it. It was as if his body was already more out of that house than in it. He tried to piece together an explanation, but the words caught. All he managed was, I think I need to figure out what happens next. He didn't look at her, stared at the coffee's steam, hoping the floor would open up and swallow him. Elisa wanted to scream. She wanted him just to say it, wanted the cruel relief of certainty. But at the same time, it hurt to think that all of it, the mornings in the garden, the nights of whispered conversations, the shared silences, might just be something good that would leave too soon. Do you want to go? She asked. Her voice almost didn't come out, as if she was speaking more to the floor than to him. I want to protect you. The way he said protect almost made her cry with anger. She hated that word. Protect is what people say right before they disappear. Protect is what her mother promised before going to work and never coming home. Protect always meant being left alone. She bit her lip, pretended to look out the window, but inside, she started to cave in on herself. And what if I don't want to be protected? She had her back to him, but Samuel felt the pain, felt the fear hiding in those words. He thought about touching her arm, but held back. Every movement felt too risky. The silence became unbearable. No more room for anyone else in it. He pushed his chair back and slowly stood. "It's not just about you," he said quietly. "People from my past, they ruin everything. I don't want to bring that here, to the village, to your life. Maybe it's better." He didn't finish. Elisa turned quickly, tension in her face, something trapped there threatening to spill out. "Better for who, Samuel? If you go, do you think everything will just stop? That it erases what already happened in here?" She didn't notice, but she was crying now. Not with sadness, but with fear and anger and desperation. She didn't want to have to choose again between staying and losing. She had already lost so much. Her heart thudded in a way it hadn't for years. He stared at her in silence, his hands trembling. He had never been so afraid of someone as he was of her at that moment. Afraid to hurt her, to be just another disappointment. His face wavered between the pain of someone who wants to run and the urge to ask to stay. "I never asked you to stay," she whispered, almost ashamed of what she felt. Samuel closed his eyes. In an instant, he saw his whole life. Bad choices, her face. He wanted to say he did want to stay, but didn't know if he had that right. Between the bridge and the abyss, he'd always known how to choose the abyss. But now, rain started falling again, thin, making a comforting sound against the roof. The two stood face to face, as if waiting for the phone to ring or some outside voice to give the answer neither of them had the courage for. Outside, the village was nearly deserted. Neighbors already whispered at their windows, and that just convinced Samuel even more that his name could turn poison there. But when he looked at Elisa, those deep eyes of someone who'd carried everything alone, something inside him begged not to back away this time. She sat near him, arms crossed over her stomach. For a moment, neither looked at the other. Their fears mirrored one another, losing what they never truly had from each other. "I don't know how this ends," she said, her voice thick. "I just know that if I have to lose it all again, let it not be because I ran away. But I can't ask you to face it if you don't want to." Simple words, but heavy. They lingered, echoing. Samuel stood up, walked to the door, hand clenched on the handle, breathing deep. Unsure if he could open it. Elisa wanted to run after him, but didn't. Neither gave in, neither stepped forward. It was that dance of people who've been hurt too much. Time crawled by, slow, almost cruel. There, between that closed door and the bridge where everything might end, their lives seemed to hang suspended. No decisions, just fear, small and human, of staying or of running. The rain was stronger now. The smell of coffee and earth muffled footsteps around the house. The two of them, on opposite sides of the abyss, waiting, each swallowing their pride and feeling in their bones that, once again, their world could flip upside down at any moment. No one said anything else. Silence settled in. But deep down, both knew, losing was just another way of running, only much slower. And so they waited, until one of them found the courage to take the next step. That morning started gray, the village shrouded in heavy mist, and the scent of wet earth drifting in through the cracked open living room window. Elisa woke up early but lay in bed, listening to the wind whistling in the house's corners. She didn't feel like getting up. Her body was tired, but the real ache was inside. The night before, she and Samuel had barely spoken. Only the sound of rain and their separate thoughts filled the silence. In the hallway, she heard hesitant footsteps. Samuel. It was always easy to tell. He'd always pause just a moment before opening a door or entering a room, as if he needed permission just to exist in her space. The smell of fresh coffee brought a little comfort, but even so, neither of them smiled truly when they met in the kitchen. Samuel looked pale. His eyes, deeper set, lacked their usual shine. His hair was a mess, a scruffy beard starting. He stood there, mug in hand, not sure what to say. Elisa noticed the small shake in his hand as he tried to serve the sugar. On another day, maybe she would have pretended not to see it. Would have pretended not to notice the weight on his shoulders, the almost silent urgency in his eyes. But now, there was no room for pretending. The clock ticked muffled beats. The storm had eased, but the world didn't seem any lighter. The silence between them wasn't comfortable, but it didn't hurt like before either. It was an invitation. A challenge. Samuel set the mug down gently, letting out a tight sigh. He looked at Elisa, searching for some sign of steadiness, some kind of permission. "There's something I need to tell you, Elisa." His voice was hoarse, almost failing. She nodded, not pressing her lips together, not shying away from his eyes. He walked to the window, gazing outside at the persistent, unwelcome fog. At first, his words came tense, in fragments. He spoke of work, lawsuits, family pride. Then the details, the slip-up, the dirty money, the wrong choice snowballing into disaster. His name in the papers, his father's disappointment. His mother crying in the night. Friends turning away. With every line, his past oozed guilt, shame, a raw fear that sounded like a lost boy confessing to his own mother. Elisa stayed silent, listening to everything. Sometimes she wanted to go over, touch his hand, but didn't. With every word, she felt his heart bleeding out for real, as if this was the moment he finally admitted he'd failed, not to justice, but to a living, breathing person who could turn her back on him any second. Samuel hunched in on himself, and she noticed when his voice really shook, telling her about broken dreams, the future that slipped away, how running to this village was just his desperate way of not giving up on himself. Suddenly, Elisa saw she was crying too, but it wasn't just for him. It was for herself. Samuel turned, saw her face, and she didn't hide. That made him stop, bite his lower lip hard, like her silence was worse than any lecture or sentence. But when she finally spoke, it was so low, it almost faded beneath the rain returning outside. "I lost everything too, Samuel." Her voice broke. He sat across from her, attentive, waiting, and she told her own story, slowly. The fire, the smoke, her terror at being unable to save anyone, the emptiness growing after when everyone stopped asking if she was okay. She spoke of dreams that burned up with the house, of hope being given a silent burial, the deep sense that she didn't deserve a second chance, that she'd never trust anyone again. Why she hid, why she stayed away from the village gatherings, why she pretended living was just waking up and breathing. For a moment, neither of them looked at anything, not even their own hands. Just the sound of two hearts beating loud, hoping to find each other through the silence. The smell of coffee cooling on the table. Outside, an old car rumbled past, sound swallowed by mist. Inside the kitchen, their pain seemed to merge with the air, thicker than the weather. Samuel wiped a tear away, clumsy. Whispered, "Do you hate me?" It wasn't just fear of her answer. It was fear of staying alone, always. Elisa shook her head, and a trembling laugh slipped out with her tears. She didn't hate him. She simply saw that, on the far side of this abyss made of silent terrors, stood someone just as wounded as she was. She reached for him, slowly. He took his time too, as if still apologizing for everything even before their fingers touched. When their hands met on the old wooden tabletop, it only lasted a heartbeat, the kind of touch no one else would notice. But neither drew their hand away. That small, almost shy gesture was more honest than all their words. It said, without speaking, "I'm just human, like you, and I want to try." His eyes were wet, but shining differently now, a shine of someone who, for the first time in a long while, believed in forgiveness. Elisa let the silence stretch. It was a good silence, loaded with all the things they no longer had to hide. The storm came back hard, every thunderclap making the house tremble slightly, but neither of them moved. Sitting together, holding hands, felt like standing on the same side of the bridge. The shame, the tragedy, the fears, all there, exposed, but also accepted. For that moment, finally, they weren't their pasts. They were two new beginnings, side by side, weathering the storm together, even if tomorrow was still uncertain. That morning, even the blue of the sky seemed to be hiding on purpose, as if the whole village was trapped in a private winter. The cold clung to their skin, but what hurt the most was the strange silence in the air, heavier than the wind howling against the closed windows. When Elisa woke up, she already felt it. It was like that stillness before thunder breaks, when even the birds go quiet. Walking down the hall, she sensed eyes slipping through cracks in the doors, words caught in the throats of people she'd known forever, but who now seemed to hold a secret from her. Samuel was quiet. He drank his coffee staring at his own hands, like he was trying to erase the memory of what he'd confessed the night before, as if the weight of who he was now pressed twice as heavy on his shoulders. Elisa wanted to say something, anything, to soothe that fear, but all she managed was to spread butter on her bread harder than necessary. The village square, where she walked early, was different. Not the trees or the old benches, but the people. Mrs. Tsida, who always complimented her flowers, looked away. Mr. Augusto, who handed out homemade candy to kids, pretended not to see her pass. The world felt smaller, suffocating, as if every house had turned into a bunker. The rumors didn't take long. Words like scandal, corrupt lawyer, danger, he's not one of us, passed from mouth to mouth, growing bigger with each telling. Nobody said anything to her face. They did better. They whispered loud enough for her to hear. Each phrase seemed to bite, to chip away at old pieces of certainty. From afar, she saw Samuel go out to gather firewood. The old men at the store stopped talking. Someone nudged a friend. Samuel noticed, his steps growing shorter, eyes lost on nothing. For a second, he considered turning back, maybe even packing his things. Elisa knew, because she saw him look for her with his eyes, pleading without words. Tell me what to do. She didn't know. Inside her, it was just a cyclone. The same old fear, the dark hole of tragedy, was trying to swallow her again. What if it all came crashing down? What if even this sliver of happiness wasn't meant for her? But then she saw Samuel's face, the resigned silence, the way he carried his pain without complaint. By late afternoon, it exploded. The meeting was in the square, as always, when something serious happened. Everyone there, pressed close, pretending it was only concern and not anger. They called for Elisa. She had no choice. Running away was pointless. In the center of it all, her legs shook. Fear was a creature lodged between her ribs. She could hear sideways questions, accusations disguised as advice. Do you know who he really is? They asked. She did. She knew and she felt for him, with everyone staring, waiting for her to give in, to distance herself. Elisa could sense the cold sweat down her back, heart beating so loudly she could barely hear the words. Some spoke with disappointment, as if she'd betrayed them by sheltering Samuel. Others masked their anger as concern. Samuel stood beneath the shade of a mango tree, looking down, his back bent, apologizing just for breathing. With every word, he seemed to shrink. He didn't move, but his trembling hands betrayed his fear. Elisa realized that no one was on his side. He was, once more, the outsider, the man marked by his past. She felt alone, too. But something in her shifted right then, maybe exhaustion from silence, or rage at seeing a whole life crushed again by rumors that only knew half the truth. She remembered her own pain, when people talked about her without knowing anything, the night spent at the edge of the abyss. She understood that if she didn't speak now, if she gave in, she'd lose more than Samuel, she'd lose the part of herself that still believed in second chances. So she took a deep breath and spoke. At first, her voice was low, unsteady, but she found the strength. I know who he is. I know enough not to judge him by what you say. He made mistakes, yes, but who here hasn't? Tell me. You all know me. You know what I've been through. If you don't trust my judgment, then it was all for nothing. She looked around. This silence was different, heavier, but strangely freeing. Some looked away. Others flushed red with embarrassment. Mrs. Tsida crossed her arms, her lips trembling like she wanted to apologize. Samuel didn't raise his eyes from the ground, but his shoulders relaxed, a tear traced down his cheek that no one dared mention. Elisa felt the quiet respect from a few old neighbors, the kind of thank you only people who've lived through judgment can give. The scrutiny didn't vanish. There were still harsh glances, people who might never speak to her again. But the most important thing was she hadn't run. She'd stood up for him, and for herself, and that became a new kind of strength. When the meeting ended, Samuel came to her. He said nothing, just took her hand. The warmth of it, still trembling but there, meant more than any word. They walked home slowly together, as if crossing sacred ground. In the village, the lights went out early that night, but between the two of them, a simple hope stayed burning that together, they could face down the whole world if they had to. Love isn't always loud. Sometimes, it just needs a voice that won't go quiet when everyone else does. No one talks about the moment when fear begins to drift quietly away. It's not sudden, and not like anyone imagines. After so much fighting, so much doubt, waking to find the village is a little less cold feels almost odd. The sky held that undefined color that comes after a storm. Washout blue, timid streaks of sun. The walk to the school was still muddy, earth sticking to her shoes, scent of rain mixed with crushed flowers on the sidewalk. Elisa walked slowly, one step at a time. Her heart raced, but in a way different from panic. Now it was just trying to keep up with some new hope. Samuel didn't say much. He just carried a box of books beside her, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Now and then, he glanced at Elisa, just quickly enough for her to notice without needing to look back. He smoothed his hair, looked at the ground, sometimes hid a smile. Funny how his silence was no longer heavy. At the gate, Elisa stopped, took a deep breath, thought of all the voices, the sidelong looks, the fear from the last time she'd been there. But today the village seemed less ready for war. Kids ran about, a mother chattered, even a few shy smiles from afar. It wasn't forgiveness, perhaps only a ceasefire. But it was enough. Samuel set the box down. Elisa heard the dry thump of books, wanted to ask if he was okay, if he was sure about this. But she stayed quiet. Deep down, she knew Samuel wasn't going anywhere, not after all they'd been through. And for the first time in ages, she didn't want to run either. The children filtered in, bringing noise, the smell of fruit, the buzzing energy of small people the world hasn't yet broken. Elisa stood at the doorframe, watching. One boy with spiky hair, a girl with tight braids, another crying softly for forgetting his notebook. Her heart clenched, the sweet kind of ache that comes with longing for a piece of yourself. Maybe she wasn't the same teacher as before. Maybe she never would be. But here, there was room for a version of herself no disaster had managed to erase. She started the day with art class, because she believed that was how new beginnings should be. Slow, colorful, making a mess, no rush to get it right. Samuel stayed in the back, stacking papers, organizing pencils, pretending not to pay attention. But Elisa saw in his eyes the hunger of someone who'd lost almost everything but never stopped wanting to see life happen. At one point, a sheet of paper fell to the floor, and Samuel bent to pick it up. Elisa shivered when their hands brushed. Accidentally, awkwardly. A 2-second touch that made time stop. She pulled her hand away quickly, as if she'd touched fire, and Samuel blushed, facing away. Inside the room, children's voices multiplied, laughter mixed with paint, scribbles, and wishes. A quiet little girl drew a broken heart and looked downcast. Elisa noticed. She crouched down beside her, whispering, "We can fix hearts together." Sometimes it takes time, but it's possible. The girl slowly looked up, her eyes huge. She didn't ask anything, but Elisa knew she understood. For a moment, Elisa saw her own reflection in these children, people trying to patch themselves up, accepting help even without asking. The wind drifted in the open window, smelling of damp earth. Samuel appeared beside Elisa, offering a box of colored pencils. He held out his hand, hesitating, like he was still asking permission to step into her life. Elisa took the pencils, but this time left her hand resting on the table a moment longer than needed. A small gesture, but for them, it felt like a promise. Between one drawing and the next, Samuel gathered papers, took down names, organized backpacks. Sometimes Elisa caught his laughter with a group of boys in the hall. It was clear, a laugh free of shame at finding happiness in public. Seeing Samuel so at ease among the kids filled her chest with a happiness she couldn't explain, an almost fearful happiness at feeling it again. During recess, Elisa spent a quiet moment leaning against the schoolyard wall. She watched the sky open wider, watched the slow-moving clouds. She wondered if she'd ever be able to forget all the past. Maybe not. But seeing Samuel laughing with the children, she finally understood what it meant to start over. It isn't erasing your scars. It's learning to live with them. When Samuel returned, he sat beside her in silence. The quiet between them grew, but it wasn't heavy. It was comfortable, the simple, healing kind you only share with someone who knows your pain without needing explanations. They sat there, watching the children, soaking in the village sounds, hair tousled by the breeze. Samuel gently took Elisa's hand still marked by doubt. She looked at him, saw the dizzy smile of someone who doesn't expect much, but doesn't want to lose anything more. "Do you think people here will ever forget?" he whispered. Elisa thought before answering. She wasn't sure. But just then, looking at a school bursting with life, she realized maybe it didn't matter. We don't need to forget. We just have to keep going. The sound of recess, the shouts, the laughter, all of it wrapped them up in something new. For the first time, Elisa realized there was no abyss between her and happiness. Just a bridge, and Samuel was the missing piece that would let her cross. That day, she became a teacher again. He, without noticing, relearned how to be whole. And together, in the noise and chaos of the children, they understood that to begin again isn't to forget. It's to let life move through you again, close to the skin, and maybe, just maybe, between two sets of intertwined fingers. It doesn't even feel like the same bridge. The same creaking wood, the same sea wind blowing up from below, pushing at the quiet night. But now there's something different. I'm not sure if it's courage or just the habit of suffering together. All I know is, this time, I'm not alone. And neither is Elisa. When we get there, silence comes first, strong, almost uncomfortable. There's no one in the street, just the sound of leaves scraping the rusty railing. The two of us stand there, not looking at each other, for a strange moment when the weight of the past returns. I remember the first night. Her in the rain, me at the edge. The abyss calling. Now it's different, but for a few seconds, everything that happened comes back, like a silent film. I glance sideways and see Elisa take a deep breath, pulling her coat around herself. I could pretend it's just the cold, but it's not just that. She's still afraid to open up, to give in, to get hurt again. So am I, but neither of us says a word. The silence is heavy. There's a longing for an embrace and a fear of falling, both at once. She pretends to be looking at the pink flowers growing between the planks. I keep looking at her hand, waiting. For what? I'm not sure. I still feel like that stranger, the broken man everyone in the village eyed with suspicion. I wonder if one day I'll just be Samuel, the man she's not ashamed to hold hands with in public. The truth is, even after everything, some parts of us are still wounded. Trusting hurts. Thinking that if it all goes wrong, I might be the reason for her sadness hurts. She knows that. I think that's why she hesitates. But then the cold wind picks up, even stronger. It startles us both. I see Elisa shiver and, out of reflex, she grabs my hand. It isn't romantic or dramatic. It's more like clutching the edge of a blanket on a bad night. Her fingers are icy against mine. I squeeze her hand gently, afraid of hurting her or of scaring her away. Her hand trembles, but she doesn't let go. I stare at our intertwined fingers, and the world shrinks down to that small space. No words are needed. We stay like that for a while, unmoving. The sound of the sea fills everything, carrying away all the voices that once hurt, the old scandal, the judgment that lingered at the school gates for weeks. Here, no one asked for explanations. Only the present exists, and right now, it's made of her touch and the scent of wetwood. Elisa turns slowly, eyes full of tears, but she tries to smile. Her voice is soft, almost a sigh. Sometimes it still feels like I'm going to fall. I know she's not talking about the cliff. I want to say something beautiful, to promise that the worst is over, but it would be a lie. My own fear is right here too, clinging to me like salt from the wind. Instead, I squeeze her hand a little tighter and answer, barely above a whisper. If you fall, I'll fall with you. She lets out a shaky laugh, sniffling. It's not much comfort, but it's the truth. I haven't promised the impossible, just that I won't let go. We stay there a bit longer. Cars pass far off, only the muffled sound of an engine drifting by. A dog barks. The village is almost asleep. On the horizon, there's still a sliver of red as the sun disappears, and the fog rises slowly, as if trying to hide us from the rest of the world. In the silence, courage seeps in, bit by bit. She rests her forehead on my shoulder, eyes closed. I stroke her back, a little unsure, like I'm learning how to care for someone all over again. There's fear, but calm too. And presence. I see how Elisa breathes deeper now, as if each breath is making more room inside her for hope. I feel like talking, telling her about my panic at losing everything again, my shame at the past, the nights I lay awake hearing her cry in the next room. But words feel too heavy here. What matters is in the silence, in the way she trusts, just a piece at a time, but truly trusts. It takes a while before she speaks again. Do you think we can do it, Samuel? Not run. Just stay. Together. I look deep into her eyes. For the first time, she doesn't blink, doesn't turn away. This time, she lets me see everything. The pain, the fear, the longing to stay, the urge to leave. There's a sob that catches but doesn't fall, just lingers at her eyelids. I don't have the right answer. All I know is that, of all things, I never again want to be the stranger who almost jumped, or the secret she has to hide. Should we try? It's the best I can do. She smiles, tired but real. The kind of smile that starts in her eyes, crooked, like a child who's just stopped crying. Try with me. I nod. The bridge groans beneath our feet, but doesn't break. Her hand squeezes mine now, warm, as if making a promise. The abyss is still there, just below. But today, between me and it, stands Elisa. There's this choice to stay. I think, silently, that maybe love is just that, not a leap, not a flight. It's staying. Staying even when everything trembles, even when the wind stings and memories pull you down. We stand there a little longer. Neither of us wants to go home yet. The fog wraps around us, The lights from the village seem far away, but here, at last, it feels like home was born. There's no more need to run. When she presses her face to my hands, I close my eyes and think, if we're going to start over, let it be here. Where the fear began, let courage begin now. On the bridge, between the abyss and a future, we're not alone. And, for the first time, believing that doesn't hurt. The coffee was cooling on the table, but no one seemed to care. It was Sunday, and in Elisa's house, that had started to mean something new. Since Samuel truly moved in, not just with his suitcase, but with the way he intended to stay, the house showed a different face. Before, Elisa would jump if she heard footsteps, preferred the echo of solitude, almost as a shield. Now, in the mornings, the kitchen was filled with sounds that said something simple. They were there, together. Samuel was never one for talking right when he woke. He served himself coffee, stared out the window in silence, but had a way of pulling up a chair, offering a bite of bread, that made Elisa feel the weight of always being on guard a little less. They glanced at each other quickly, then looked away, like they were learning the choreography of a new dance. It was funny because, deep down, words weren't needed. In the sound of shy laughter, in the way their feet bumped under the table, a new routine was settling in. The village noticed, maybe even before they did. It showed up in the details, the bakery sending fresh bread every Saturday, the neighbor who always stopped by to ask how things were and sometimes left a cake at the door. No one looked at Samuel like they were waiting for drama anymore. Now he was Elisa's guy, the one who fixed the broken gate, the man with dry jokes at dinner, who listened to children with the attention of someone who truly sees. Elisa's living room, which used to smell damp and stayed shut for days, was now filled with music and laughter. It was normal after lunch for someone to show up asking for advice. Some older ladies wanted embroidery tips, a teenage girl wept over her first breakup. A neighbor would sometimes come just for coffee. Samuel made space, sometimes sitting quietly on the floor with the kids, smiling, almost shy, like he still couldn't believe he was really part of the picture. Even so, the past hadn't vanished. Every so often, Elisa would stop mid-sentence, her gaze drifting away from the present, fixed on nothing. In those moments, Samuel wanted to reach for her hand, but instead, he'd just sit a little closer, close enough for her to know he was there. Sometimes she accepted the touch, sometimes she didn't. It was like, together, they learned to respect each other's inner cliffs. They didn't try to hide their scars. They just tried to make them hurt less, at least today. A cold wind blew that afternoon, chasing dry leaves across the garden. Samuel, sitting on the porch, slowly tended a flower bed. He breathed in the scent of damp earth, listened to the children playing by the gate. Across the way, Elisa was hanging laundry, hair tied up anyhow, a loose strand falling over her forehead. She didn't notice, but Samuel watched her for a while. It wasn't just beauty, it was the courage of someone who still wakes up each day willing to try again. He thought about that courage because there, with the cold wind biting, he remembered how hard it had been to let himself stay. At first, he thought he was just running away, that soon everything would reset to zero, that the shame and fear would drown out everything else, and he'd have to leave. But there, in the rhythm of days, he realized that starting over has no formula. There are silences, stumbles, doubtful looks in the mirror. But most of all, there's the other. The way Elisa existed with him changed everything. At night, when the house filled with shadows, there was still fear. The storm might have passed over the village, but inside, it left traces. Sometimes Elisa dreamed of the night of the accident. She'd wake up sweating, scared, unable to breathe. Samuel pretended not to notice, but when she sat up in bed, frozen, he'd get up quietly, rest his forehead on her shoulder, breathe with her, as if he could share the weight of the dream. They never talked about it. They just stayed there in the dark, silence saying all that needed to be said. The bridge had changed, too. What once made them dizzy became almost a ritual. After dinner, they'd walk there together, even if no one suggested it. They didn't hold hands all the time, but sometimes Samuel would barely brush Elisa's fingers, just to be sure it wasn't a dream. They'd stop in the middle, the wind colder than it should be, and look at the sea far below. Samuel remembered the first day, when he'd thought about never coming back. Elisa knew, and sometimes she'd adjust his coat, her eyes understanding more than words ever could. They didn't say, "I love you," all the time, or make eternal promises. They'd understood love wasn't just a promise, but presence. It was sharing bread, washing pots, passing over the blanket when the cold came too soon. It was shoving the couch closer to the fire. It was accepting the past as a shadow, never again as a guide. Some nights, the house was just theirs. Other times it was packed, people everywhere, Loud laughter in the living room, blankets on the porch, stories told 1,000 times over. Now even Elisa laughed about it. Samuel did too. They'd look at each other over their mugs, sometimes silent, and then that was everything. Old fear, the relief of still being together, the gentle hope that the future might be less harsh than they'd imagined. Deep down, they knew the bridge still existed, and so did the abyss, but now they were learning, one day at a time, to live with both. They no longer had to run or pretend the past didn't hurt. Together, they had made a new kind of home. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And, in the end, that was enough.